When you're searching for a CRM, you need to know that the CRM can handle things like centralization. When you're searching for leasing AI, you need to know that the language models are trained on prospect communication. So there are very few verticals that we feel are big enough to support a horizontal business model like that. And real estate is obviously one of those. Real estate is obviously nuanced as well in that we have this rooftop model, right? When you acquisition and disposition locations, that can't be handled by a horizontal vendor management platform. When you have bundles of pricing and packaging with packages that change on a monthly basis, horizontal platforms aren't geared for that. Contract management is an absolute train wreck. And variable cost is a huge area of focus right now, right? Like insurance has soared, interest rates have soared, taxes are taxes. Software and services make up a huge component of variable costs. But with every single one of our user group that we talked to, not one of them could find their most recent contract, let alone know the upcoming renewal date for it.
Welcome to the Digible Dudes podcast. I see your face. Thank you. Reed and I were just talking about how like the old episodes had music, and then we're like, we don't ever listen to our podcast now, so we don't know if it has the music anymore. Anyways, welcome. We're here.
Yes, we are on some level. Darren, apologies if we're still getting that, but yeah, we did love that intro. So
I don't want to skew our numbers by listening to our own episode. You know, it'll look like we had a 25% lift in listens, and he'll beat his chest. So I can't listen to our own stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I can't get through more than 10 minutes, which is usually the length of our intros. So I never really get.
Well, you can't
I
because
get to the meat of them.
You usually drop some sort of curse word, and your girls are listening.
Right.
So
we're past that, though. I don't know if I'm proud of that, but now the floodgates are open as far as some of the movies that we're, sharing, because it used to be like, the whole earmuffs, like, or we would just have to explain, what this word meant or whatever. And now they're just like, Dad, Mom, it's okay.
Yeah.
We've heard the F word before. Doesn't mean they like it coming out of Dad's mouth.
Yeah.
But they're way more accepting. So, but I don't want to let that get away from me. I still try to show some pretty good sensitivity.
Have you heard it come out of their mouths?
No, that would be, and they love the movie, that Christmas Story. If you know the scene, changing the wheel, and he says, "Oh, fuck," and then all hell breaks loose. I think they still feel that. In fact, I have to squeeze this in, and this is a huge compliment to, I'm going to say more to Miranda, not to me, but to our girls too. My dad used to tell this story over and over to people. It was one of his favorites. So when he was raising the three of us, and I have two older sisters, there was some point where he was taking the family to a restaurant somewhere, and my sisters apparently ran out in front, like just darted out, and he said, "Girls," and he said they stopped on a dime. He was like, and I didn't even have to say more. And he's like, it was so amazing, like that, not, and it wasn't a power thing. It was just like how mindful and respectful they still were. I don't know what age. I hope it wasn't in their teens that, but where I'm going with this is in relation to the movie, and for us is they have, they listen to Taylor Swift. I don't know if you realize that half her songs now have the E for explicit on Spotify.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she has all sorts of curse words now. That's part of how we bridge this whole thing. And so does a singer named Olivia Rodrigo. And there's one song in particular from that artist that like couldn't call out the F word more, like not frequency, but it's in the chorus. So it's only used a few times, but it's in the chorus, and they will sing full vigor, like the three of them in my car. And then when it gets to that point, silence, total silence, because they dare not say the F word in front of me. So that's passing it down a generation. I love you, Dad. But my girls are still showing me, that respect and mindful enough to not drop an F-bomb in front of me.
We listen to Kids Bop, but not because of Griffin and we're worried about the language. It's more, I don't know. It's like, oh, they've already curated the best songs. So like, well, I just wish it was like, it's way heavy treble. It'd be nice if it was like more the full spectrum of the of the thing, but they remove obviously all of that stuff. They switch it for their language. So anyways, well, this episode we have Ben Steward on, co-founder of Revyse, and this is really interesting. He's attacking a similar problem as I had viewed it, as Adam, who we had on before from Pivot, just like a month or so back. So to me, that's just a signal to say like there's a real issue here, that you have multiple folks trying to get into the, I'll call it like vendor management space. That's where they cross. Now there's definitely differentiators after that, as far as like a lot of what Revyse is doing is around discovery and such as well. So yeah, so obviously there's a big need here. I feel like Digible has the same need, except, you know, in a different way, less on multifamily specific. But yeah, I enjoyed the conversation with Ben, and it's nice to really sit down with him after, I think you had mentioned it's 5 years or 6 years since we first got to know him. And I do feel, even though you called that the New Zealand accent, I feel like he's really dropped most of it. So it's like it's deprecating from the man, and that's a
I
little
think it
sad.
is deprecating a little bit. And we have his beloved wife, Bobby, probably to blame for that. But yeah, we had a fun little exchange with him. I think it was on the episode, not before, but just about the impact of his accent, you know, here in America, you know, coming from Love Actually, or the reverse, which is like, you know, were you attracted to an American accent, but now seemingly assimilating a little bit. So I was looking forward to a little bit more thickness, a little bit more intense accent from Ben, but it's still there. Love you, Ben. It was fun to hear the energy and passion from Ben. I mean, he's, you know, kind of like a kid in a candy store. He's like, right now is one of the best times because we're not really saying no to anything. Not meaning they're not showing discipline, but like they're just trying to keep an open mind, keep the discovery going, develop as quickly as they can, and kind of see where that product market fit is. Whereas I felt like Adams maybe already it's crystallized a little bit for him, and you know, he's picking a spot within vendor management, more on the contract side related to software. But yeah, we'll definitely be checking in with them down the road and see how much that stayed true or versus deviated.
Yeah, they're to your point, they're taking a lot of customer feedback right now, and you know, adapting as they see necessary. But we've done a number of things with them already. You know, Trevor's really leading the charge on that. He's a huge fan. But overall, I'm just really happy that there's different players in the space trying to I don't know if I should use the word democratizing, but they're just helping like organize the data so that you have like, you know, that vendor matrix in front of you, and then can choose like, okay, yeah, I needed to connect to Entrada in this way or Yardi in that way, and it fits this pricing model. Okay, let me have a conversation. So we do talk a little bit about that, as far as like, you know, how should vendors be using SDRs, you know, to qualify sales ahead of the conversation, and different things of that nature. So it's pretty wide ranging. Conversation that we had, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. My biggest question with this is it a different version of MTA, multi-touch attribution, that gets me so worked up? I hope it doesn't become that, but meaning it's really not solvable. And now you're going to have to decide how far you can get, and will that be enough to build a business on? Maybe it won't. You know, maybe if you just solved just the contract side of this, you could build a business on it. It does get me back to, you and I've discussed a couple times, or I've referenced the book Hook, but you know, the whole vitamin versus, you know, painkiller. It's like, this seems more of a painkiller. You're not going to go in every day. At least I hope not. You're not going to have that many contracts. And so is the pain great enough? And can you effectively solve enough of that pain to build a business on it? It doesn't surprise me that they've gotten so much engagement and interest. And same thing with Adam. You and I, when we first released Fiona, it was like people were lining up. They were like, you did it, you solved it, you know. And then, you know, over time, we realized there were still some holes, things we weren't solving and may not be able to solve in the near future. And we had to pivot and kind of think differently about the software we're building. So that's what will be interesting to me with this vendor management. You know, I don't want to say crusade, but like, as some new platforms pop up to try and solve it, what will that experience be for them?
It excited and relieved me in some ways, because at one point when we came across some of the challenges launching Fiona, people were like, well, I don't know what my terms are in my contract to do what Fiona's telling me to do. Am I allowed to make that change? Or when can I move vendors because this other vendor's not matching, not able to execute on these recommendations? And so we, on the roadmap for the MOS, the marketing operating system, we've envisioned, we have contract management on there. And we knew it was a big pain point for marketing, but we hadn't discovered I guess what Ben is discovering and Adam, how big of an issue it is just at large across all contracts. We just knew about marketing. So the relief here is we didn't put the time into that part yet because it didn't seem like the complexity seemed so immense, and we weren't sure that was going to be the killer feature that now solved all the problems. And so, I'm pulling for them to solve it so that now we could just great, we'll just hook into them to handle this part of the marketing problem that we have so that Fiona can make its recommendations around your terms.
Yeah.
So anyways, fun conversation. Excited for both groups, and hope you guys enjoy. Okay, we're here with Ben Steward from Revyse. Ben, introduce yourself.
Hey guys, thanks so much for having me. Hi everyone listening. Ben Steward, I'm the co-founder of Revyse.
All right, Ben. We have known you for, Reed was actually hitting me with this morning. It may have been 5 years ago that we met, Ben.
It was, I think, our second AIM. The first AIM, we were kind of, it's like not having a visa. We were a little bit illegal, like just loitering around, seeing if we could talk to anybody. And then the second year, I think we actually bought like a entry sponsorship or something. And that's when we bumped into Ben.
Yeah.
G5.
And I remember when that happened because we were walking into the doors of like the main entrance of AIM. And I remember you being like, you got sidetracked with Ben for a bit, and then you're really excited afterwards. Oh, that was Ben, from G5, blah blah blah, and you were just really pumped about it. So
yeah, I don't know if it was the accent that I was pumped about, or if it was the actual substance of our conversation. I always think I can't help it because this morning I was when we introduced, we have our weekly roundup, Ben, for the whole company, and we're like, yeah, if you haven't been listening, this is a good one to listen to because we got Ben, and he's got one of those cool, and I think I said British accents, and then Trevor immediately jumped on me and he was like, it's New Zealand, Reed. I was like, oh man. So he doesn't have the impact from the movie Love Actually, if you guys have seen it, where he comes to the States and they just flock to him just based on the accent. I don't know if the reverse is true though. I don't think that it is. Like if we were to go to New Zealand, they'd probably just be like, oh, here's a couple of obnoxious Americans. Well, or would would they actually appreciate, whatever accent we have?
Ben, your wife was from Bend, Oregon when you met her. So did she have that effect on you with the American accent?
It 100% worked on me. It 100% had the effect. What? Like, dang, that's an American accent. That's cool. And I remember,
oh my God.
You just covered.
I remember the AIM conversation vividly. You guys made a big splash and it's been fun watching you all grow. Like I remember the pink t-shirts walking around AIM the first time with Fiona, and I was like, wow, these guys are onto something cool.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, we'll probably get into this, so I'll just table it for now, but I think I'm going to find a way to connect this back as we start to hear about Revyse and kind of how you're launching that and how things are going. It's definitely exciting, obviously, when you first are getting out there and getting the word out. Yeah, there's also the challenges of that, right? When nobody really knows who you are, what you're about, like really nailing that 2-minute pitch, which we'll give you a chance to do, of course, for Revyse. But why don't you, I think you're probably going to ask him next, but just, catch us up a little bit since AIM. That was 2018, maybe 2019. You've been to a couple different companies and now you got an exciting company of your own, but yeah, can you just catch us up a little bit in the last few years?
And I've been so lucky, like in my journey in multifamily. I was a serial entrepreneur before I stumbled into multifamily with G5. Just had the most incredible mentors at G5. It was such a breeding ground for success. A lot of the G5ers just kind of spread their wings into multifamily when that was acquired by RealPage, and had such great learning opportunities there. Through the acquisition to RealPage, working with the investment bankers, helping tell that story. It was a really cool experience. From there, went to a really groundbreaking company called Funnel. Anyone listening by now has heard of Funnel. They know what they're doing. Really leading the charge and put their flag on centralization efforts, and have developed a really comprehensive front office suite of products to help in the centralization efforts. And I think that's going to be another big trend in multifamily, and Funnel did a really good job of getting ahead of that. Was lucky enough to be the chief revenue officer there for a couple of years through a really critical stage of growth. But once you're an entrepreneur, you're always an entrepreneur, and just had this itch to go and start Revyse. It's fun because my wife's in the industry as well. And she's actually been on the operator side, head of marketing for a very well-known company, BH Management. And I was on the vendor side, leading go-to-market teams for the best part of a decade. And our poor kids every night had to listen to our dinner table conversation about how broken this industry is and how there was a better way to do it. So we took the jump, we quit corporate jobs, and here we are. We're 8 months into Revyse.
So is it one of the kids' ideas, Revyse, or was it yours? Just based on the dinner conversation, I don't know if
the poor kid was like, "Don't mention the word again." Like, it was honestly, it was very much Bobby's idea. It was from an operator perspective and through the lens of an operator. Like finding, vetting, managing software and services was just brutal. Like there was no like platform to do so. There was countless hours wasted on Google. And then when we married that with kind of the vendor perspective of having no channel for in-market buyers to come and see what you're doing, right? Like all of the efforts that I was doing through Funnel largely were marketing driven, but a lot of it's brand awareness, outbound. Outbound's hard in multifamily, right? No one wants emails in their inbox. No one wants a cold call. So we kind of stumbled upon this like huge shift in B2B software sales, how like marketing was leading the charge. Sales was taking more of a back seat. And I got to witness that firsthand at Funnel, building out probably arguably the best marketing team in the space. And backing that up with inbound leads going straight to a small sales team. And we looked at that model and said, like, there is so much opportunity to amplify people's message, create one cohesive platform for the industry to come to like discover who's innovating, who's doing well, without the horrible outbound hitting their inbox every week, especially around trade shows.
Well, when I was trying to describe Revyse to folks that have asked me about it, you tell me if I was wrong in saying this, but I was saying it's like G2 for multifamily.
Revyse has a really big mission. And where we've started, so the mission was to help operators discover, buy, and manage software and services, the very best software and services to run their business. We launched Revyse Discovery, which was the first real component. That was very much on the discover side. And that has a very G2 feel, right? We took a lot of inspiration from Capterra, G2, Trust Radius, horizontal software platforms, doing a similar thing, right? Providing third-party social proof, aiding in the awareness and top of funnel discovery. But we've got kind of a bigger mission behind that that's coming to fruition as we speak.
Okay, lay it on me. I don't know how to ask.
We're gonna bite.
Okay, so the discover side, I think one of the cool things, just to backstep a tiny bit, we've both been in the industry now for about a decade, right? So we're 20 years collective of understanding this industry and the nuances of it. And dang, it is an insular industry, right? Like it is very networky, very peer-to-peer, very phone a friend. And when we launched the business, we did just a huge amount of market feedback, like market discovery. We did a big survey of buyers in the space, like notable multifamily software buyers, and asked a bunch of pressing questions, right? Like, where do you start your search for new providers? How do you vet new providers? What do you look for? Would a review platform be helpful in your buying journey, right? We asked all of these questions to understand, is the problem statement real across all segments, not just at the very top end where Bobby was, but like, does this problem statement play all the way down to 2,000 unit operators, mid-market operators? And it was really interesting. What we discovered was the problem was actually amplified at the lower end of the market because they were just less resourced, right? Like Real Foundations and NMHC just put out a big survey, and 41% of the respondents said that the blocker to implementing new technology is just resources. They don't have the time to vet. They don't have the time to draft KPIs, business cases, etc. So we determined that the problem statement was bigger than just discovery, right? It's bigger than just finding the new providers. Although transparently, that's blown my mind. Like we have over 700 products on the platform now. And I think about 400 of them I didn't know existed after a decade in multifamily. And that's growing, that problem statement. Like no-code AI tools are being introduced. There's a lot more proliferation in our space. Real estate's a very attractive vertical in a downturn. But the problem was bigger than that. It was more managing contracts, managing renewals, pricing. There was no core platform to help with corporate expenses when it came to implementing compliance, IT risk reviews, understanding who has SOC 2 compliance, understanding the integrations ecosystem before you have to go through 4 different demos and talk to a sales rep to say, do you integrate with Yardi? And the rep's like, yeah, of course we do. So the problem statement was huge. Revyse Discovery Platform, the G2 component, was the launch. But we have just released Revyse Intelligence, which is a vendor intelligence module, which allows operators now, built on top of the Revyse Discovery database, to map and manage their full tech stack and all of the services as well, with contract reminders, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll pause there for a breather, and we can go as deep into that as you'd like to.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, even we here at Digible have that. We were just talking about that in our executive meeting this morning of like, what's active, what's not active. So it's a big enough problem just for, companies at large, let alone if you then get specific with multifamily. And there's a lot of folks that I'm aware of that are trying to solve that type of issue at the like more generic level, but not specific level. But obviously there are a lot of intricacies and challenges with multifamily specifically. So maybe walk us through why a bespoke solution was needed for this industry. Like why do some of the other, G2s and I won't name any of the other like vendor management platforms, but yeah, why does that not work in multifamily?
Yeah, I don't mind naming a few that we took a lot of inspiration from. So Vendor, Tropic, Zip, Xylo. There's a number of horizontal SaaS vendor management platforms that are booming right now. Like they all have $1 billion plus valuations. And if you look at all of those platforms, the core message is saving money on software, right? It's finding software overlap, it's helping with negotiations, it's early renewals, and just keeping on top of the whole ecosystem, right? So those horizontal platforms don't understand the nuances of our industry, right? When you're searching for a CRM, you need to know that the CRM can handle things like centralization. When you're searching for leasing AI, you need to know that the language models are trained on prospect communication. So there are very few verticals that we feel are big enough to support a horizontal business model like that. And real estate is obviously one of those. And real estate is obviously nuanced as well in that we have this rooftop model, right? So when you acquisition and disposition locations, that can't be handled by a horizontal vendor management platform. When you have bundles of pricing and packaging with packages that change on a monthly basis, horizontal platforms aren't geared for that. When you have corporate overhead versus property overhead that's allocated out to the properties, horizontal software can't handle that. When you actually disposition or cancel locations, horizontal software can't handle that. So there's a lot of nuances to this rooftop model. And there are adjacents that we look at, automotive, healthcare to a degree. But multifamily is nuanced in that sense.
So what's the pitch? You sort of said like these more generic models are save money on software, find overlap. Do you view your core pitch the same, or have you guys gone to market with a different core value prop?
We're staggering this. So there are some very cool value props. The first is contract management is an absolute train wreck. And variable cost is a huge area of focus right now, right? Like insurance has soared, interest rates have soared, taxes are taxes. Software and services make up a huge component of variable costs. But with every single one of our user group that we talked to, not one of them could find their most recent contract, let alone know the upcoming renewal date for it. So that was module one, being able to organize all of the contracts, give early renewal reminders, MVP, basic MVP. And we released that a while back. A huge tailwind that we had that actually hit us after we'd launched Revyse was that the SEC just changed their ruling on the mapping and managing of third-party technology providers and the reporting of any cybersecurity risk. And that happened just in September past. And that was not on our radar at all when we launched the vendor management platform. So that's a huge tailwind. And now public companies and private companies with more than 500 investors have to file with the SEC every year, showing that they're comprehensively mapping their third-party technology landscape and logging any cybersecurity incidents. So we've now built all of that into the second module, which just launched, which is a full vendor page where cybersecurity logging is available, storing documents like SOC 2 Type 2 compliance is available, assigning things like business criticality, and overall risk, vendor risk, can all be done through the Revyse vendor pages as well now. Where we're going, and we had an update on this last couple of days ago from our co-founder, and it's pretty exciting, is very much unearthing that shadow spend and Maverick spend. So the industry just went through one of the best times I've known, for sure. And everyone got a little bit fat and happy with expenses and, buying new software and trying to jump on this innovation, which the industry desperately needs and still needs. But what we're able to do now, and we're introducing AI to the platform, is assess your ledger and then apply AI to the ledger, cross-reference against the database of contracts to find any uncontracted spend or shadow spend or Maverick spend that you just weren't aware of. So we're kind of cross-referencing agreements against GL and really starting to surface spend that, honestly, the companies working with us right now were like, oof, we hadn't considered that. We dispositioned that location a long time ago, or you know what, we don't need that right now. It has overlap. So that's a pretty exciting release that we've been working on frantically in the background.
I really like this vocabulary, Maverick spend. Reed, who's a bigger Maverick, yourself or me? I was thinking spend, but in general is also a toughie.
Well, if we mean somebody that doesn't like to play by the rules, that might be a close one. We may have to phone a friend.
Yeah, Brian can start giving out like badges, like top Maverick of the month. Yeah. Well, Ben, that's super. I like what you're doing. It seems simple when you say it for someone that doesn't know the industry, but I can only imagine how complex it is. What has been, or what is the biggest challenge that you guys face? What's the hardest part?
That's a really good question. I'd say this is the biggest challenge, and it's also like the biggest validation that what we're building is so necessary. Onboarding is incredibly difficult. Like actually, like finding those agreements to be able to structure the data from them is a lift. It's a lift. And at first I'm like, dang, that's a huge issue for us. It's going to be time to revenue. But the more we sat on that and the more we thought about it, the more we realized like that's exactly why this is needed. Like not only do companies, like they can't find their agreement, but they're missing things like contracted price increases, or they've got staggered locations on staggered renewal dates, which is almost impossible to manage. So it's challenging, but it validates the problem statement.
Well, since you said the mission or vision is quickly growing beyond the discovery, you mentioned, of course, the management and mapping. What all does the management entail? So I think, you mentioned the challenge for a lot of multifamily operators is just having the resources to devote, when it comes to the new technologies. I feel like, the other half of that is normalizing the picture with all the different technologies so that you really have a sense of what's working and what's not. When we've had a lot of entrepreneurs and multifamily on the podcast, it's one of the questions I typically come to at some point is, what are the KPIs, and then how, I guess, do you normalize the picture for the person that's ultimately evaluating that technology. So I may already be going further out than what you guys are, where you're focused, but just bringing it back to how do you define management? So now that the kind of scope or vision has grown,
there are two areas where we're hyper focused right now, and we're getting feedback from our users on the value. The first is structured data to help inform negotiations. So because we're built on top of the Revyse Discovery database, every product is in the Revyse Discovery platform that we can find, and it's growing daily. Every product has a category, right? We've set about categorizing the industry, and every category has a resident lifecycle phase. So as you think about resident lifecycle phases, you've got shopping, leasing, retention, et cetera, et cetera. What we're doing in the future stages of vendor intelligence is we're able to now show people, hey, in this category, you're over-indexed or under-indexed in spend relative to benchmark or relative to peer groups. And peer groups really being like-sized portfolios. So because we're able to structure the data out of these agreements, and because we're able to aggregate and anonymize into a resident lifecycle phase, we're able to start providing spend insights on, hey, you're over-indexed on corporate overhead, or you're over-indexed on marketing spend relative to benchmark. And we're starting to provide some insights future state on where spend is appropriate, where spend is even missed, right? Like-sized portfolios spend a ton on renewals, and your spend is zero there. Should you consider shopping that platform? And by the way, here's the discovery platform with all the people playing in that space. So that's one area that we're really looking hard at. Obviously, we've got to hit critical mass in terms of data to be able to really do that effectively. But the second area is what we're calling intake. If you look at a lot of the horizontal platforms that we've mentioned prior, they all have this story of intake to procurement. And there are platforms that exist today for that with, turns or finding a local painter or paint suppliers, etc. But there are not platforms that exist today for corporate spend. And by intake, we mean, this person has, a $5,000 software spend budget, setting out on a journey, and it's actually going to be $10,000. So they come to Revyse, they start their intake or they start their shopping journey on Revyse. It routes to department head for sign off. It routes to CFO for sign off. It routes to IT for risk review, and all of the threaded conversations that can exist within the platform as well. A lot of companies have policy here, but the policy is not necessarily followed. And we think that spend control is going to be such a critical part of near-term future state of the platform that we're looking to build all of those workflows in as well.
Cool. So what is then the business model? How does Revyse make money? Is it, 3 or 4 different channels? Is it, your basic premium standard subscription?
Yeah. So we
have look like?
2 different real value propositions, right? One is for vendors and one is for operators. And we'll probably huddle up on the community here in a few minutes as well and start discussing that a little bit. But for the vendors, we want to help in the discovery, the third-party reviews, the categorization, making sure that they're visible at that point of search, right? When someone raises a hand and says, we're in market searching for advertising providers, we want them to leverage the Revyse platform, find who's playing in the space, look at reviews, and start their journey there. And there's a somewhat nominal cost for vendors to have enhanced listings on the discovery platform.
I was going to say, are you going to go apartments.com or apartment list on the vendor side? Pay to play or fixed listings?
We've looked at both models. We've got kind of enhanced profiles that are a fixed cost today. But with that, we also have the community, right? And the other thing that we felt like was missing from this industry specifically was platform for conversation, right? We all have the trade shows and we go and have these meaningful, cool in-person conversations, but then we disperse and they're gone until the next one, right? And so there was no 24/7 real platform for conversation. So shortly after the launch of the discovery platform, we launched our community. This is not announced yet, but by the time this is published, it'll probably be announced that we're unlocking the community completely for the whole industry. So initially we paywalled it. We've since found a couple of sponsors to help sponsor the community. and really sponsor this platform for conversation. So that's another just content distribution channel for the vendors as well. And then monetization opportunity number 2 is really on the operator side. So helping them map, manage, save money on the negotiations, and also the compliance with SEC. Vendor intelligence is its own kind of opportunity for operators.
Cool. So what's the sweet spot then for you guys on, I'll say, the operator side? So not on the vendor side. I think that's probably pretty broad spectrum. As you mentioned, 400 that you didn't even really know about. Have a chance to get some exposure. But yeah, for operators, are you really targeting the top 50 in MHC, or is this something that you also think Revyse could support, the smaller portfolios that just have maybe 8 to 10 assets?
In our survey, again, it played across all segments. So I'd say everything from 2,000 units up to the biggest of the big, and even the biggest of the big are really struggling with this. And the larger ones that acquire and disposition assets quickly, very, very difficult to stay on top of the full tech stack. So yeah, I mean, it plays across all segments. Owner operators are all over this right now because, and it's funny because third-party managers are, right, like margins are razor thin everywhere, on the third-party side, and on the owned and operated side as well. So
I'm curious about I mean, you've worked in other industries as well, Ben, but we only know our experience at Digible. So one of our uniques is that we get people to sign contracts, or all month to month, they can kind of come and go. We don't want to hold someone hostage if they're unhappy. And obviously if a property, that means, like, since they can leave whenever, there's not, you called it like shadow spend, but there's not like zombie accounts of ours, because people can just leave when they want, or if a property is no longer live, we usually bill the property directly, not the management company. So we know right away, and so we can kill whatever it is. So I'm just giving that as background to say I don't know what it's like in this industry, but from your experience, do the vendors in the space, are they holding people to their contracts, or they, like, if they lose a property, are they like, oh shoot, sorry, you didn't have that property, so we won't bill you for it, or we'll give you a credit back? I'm guessing this happens more at the corporate level. Like if I'm billing the management company, that might be where I have a license model. I'm like, you bought for 100 properties. Like, sorry, like you bought for 100 properties. I didn't care.
A good opportunity to give you guys a shout out, because your corporate culture is rad. And we've seen it from afar, and we have, but it really is. I mean, your approach is, if we aren't doing right by you, then great. We've spent a lot of time absorbing complex contracts to build the software to be able to accommodate them. And that is not the case, for sure. People are, I'd go as far as saying account management teams are not proactively surfacing renewals because retention is so critical right now. I mean, SaaS has changed a lot in the last 2 years, year and a half. With VC, with funding, with efficiency, and this is sticky. I don't know of a company right now that is proactively surfacing renewal agreements. In fact, a lot of them are keeping it on the down low. So the problem is pervasive, and I think, I mean, I wish Bobby were here as well, because firsthand from her experience, they dispositioned an asset 7 years ago that they actually had a bill for 7 years later, and were able to negotiate on it. But there was still a sunk cost there. And I can tell you firsthand from talking with an operator just this morning, they missed a renewal, but they intended to sunset that agreement. And they actually had to negotiate with the vendor, and it actually cost them money.
It's interesting. So was my assumption correct that like in Bobby's scenario or that other one, that they're billing corporate? So it's like they send the bill to corporate or to the management company, and that's why the management company feels like they have to negotiate.
There's a number of different things that we're seeing in all of the agreements, and I think every instance is happening right now. Right, there is some billing ownership, there are some billing property management, there are some with MSAs, there are some with just, hey, email us when you add a location and we'll add it, which doesn't retroactively show up in the MSA. So there are some with staggered renewal dates. It is a huge mess. It really is. I mean, I don't think when we embarked on this, we realized how big a mess it really was.
Yeah, I mean, for us, they usually have the LLC of the property that is like the contract. So that also protects them so that like if we didn't have month-to-month agreements, it's like, well, that's no longer an entity anymore, right? So good luck chasing it down. But again, we structured ourselves like this because we didn't want billing to be a friction point. And so we're like, let's just make it easy and flexible. And also, we knew that, to your point earlier, like if someone was really unhappy, how much do I still want to be charging them and then fighting me on it? Like that feels, I'm not providing value. That said, we have recognized there are times like with Fiona, if we had gone, if our go-to-market motion was go to the management company and say, this is a forced, you must buy for every property at once. Then it become more a part of their workflow versus like they only have it on some assets. And so then it's not is ingrained in the workflow. So there's some downsides to it for sure that we've talked about, but we've had that part of our smack recipe, just something that we weren't willing to change. So
and I think another part of what we're unearthing in all of this is the corporate overhead, right? So it's not just limited to the pass-through to location expenses. It's really like your Google suite. It's your project management software. It's your budgeting software. It's your investment platform. Like there's a lot of recurring corporate overhead that is billed straight to the third-party management company as well.
So what is, I'm going to dive a little bit under the hood here with the platform. What is the UI like? And I'm sorry that I haven't done a test drive or seen a demo yet, Ben, but can you share at a high level, for example, since you remember somewhat fondly your first exposure to Fiona, one of the things that we really prioritized with that was simplicity. I remember when I showed David a few mock-ups, he was like, good God, there's like 28 inputs here, Reed. Nobody's going to use this. It's way too bloated, if you remember. And he's like, we just got to strip this thing down and make it super easy. And so we did, but then we also got feedback after we launched that people were like, what is it using? Could I, manipulate it this way, modify it that way? It's really tricky between the power users, super users, and then, kind of what you're trying to do with the broader market. So for you guys, I could see people wanting to search vendors in so many different ways, cost, contract terms, markets that they're in, integrations that they have, blah, blah, blah. So talk us through just high level, like how's the UI actually work when you're searching for a vendor?
Good question. So we have two superpowers. One of them's Bobby, and the other one is our co-founder, who actually is an ex-G5er as well. So one of the lead engineers at G5, he's our CTO. Bobby's unique in that she went to the operator side, right? So she understood the problem statement firsthand, but she's also certified in product management. And she's probably the most remarkable product manager I've ever met in a decade of software. And she has this just uncanny ability to translate problem statement into user-friendly product. So she's just been hard at work creating this. And we've also been working with some just incredible UX UI designers. And it is challenging. Part of what we've had to do, Reed, transparently, we've had to set up our own professional services arm, because structuring the data out of messy contracts, I'm talking like handwritten napkins, some of them, some of them are just
totally
ugly,
we've seen them.
So structuring the data out of those has been a challenge. And that's why we're actually taking the burden of onboarding ourselves. But once the onboarding is done, the clean data that you get from the structured agreements and the categorization in resident lifecycle phase, categorization by department, the list of prioritized upcoming renewals, it's a pretty clean UX UI.
Very cool. Well, I'm excited to see it. Go ahead, David.
Well, I was going to ask, maybe it's a little bit of a detour, so I'll let you continue your train.
Well, the other, this gets a little bit back to the management, and I hope it's okay to keep making some comparisons or references to our experience with Fiona. But was the compliance part. So when you talk vendor intelligence and trying to help them with some of those recommendations, navigate, the lattice of technology in multifamily, and then you're scrubbing some of these contracts. It sounded like almost a 23andMe model as you build up, the more the benchmarking and the recommendations improve and the context. What about the kind of following them through, meaning like now you've chosen this was kind of a recommendation that the platform offered up, and please correct me if I'm getting this wrong on some level, but we were unable to follow that through because of some of the things you're even mentioning with contracts, but just how kind of complicated and inconsistent the platforms and data were. We wouldn't know whether they were actually following through on the recommendations from Fiona. And so I didn't know for Revyse if you guys have already confronted that, or you're stopping short of that, meaning this is the recommendation, this is where you should probably focus some of your time and effort, and you'll save some money, or you'll pick a better technology. Is there any kind of feedback loop on the platform?
It's a good question. And we're in a part of the fun, like really fun part of like the stage of our business is that anything is possible. And so like,
good time to be enjoy it while it lasts, man.
Yeah. But it is like, it's cool because we've been so lucky again in that really sophisticated operators have lent us time to develop this product. Right. And again, I was just talking with a CTO this morning of a very notable multifamily operator. And they were saying like exactly that. They were saying, hey, it's one thing to surface companies to us. It's another to surface companies to us that are already integrated, right? So like, who do we know for sure is integrated with Yardi before we have to demo 5 companies? It's another thing, again, to help us set out the KPIs before we even embark on that. Like, what does success look like in a pilot or in implementation? And it's another thing, again, to help us with the management of SOC 2 compliance, or if they're storing PII or business criticality. And so there's this like series of things that we're gathering in terms of feedback, and we're just adding as modules. We do intend to go beyond the purchase and into the implementation, potentially even asking for feedback on, you shopped this vendor, you lost this vendor, why, and then providing the feedback back to the vendor so that they can continue to iterate and improve. But we're at this really fun point of like, there's not much we can't do. We got to prioritize ruthlessly.
Well, Ben, what I know you said you're still working towards critical mass, but what are some of the surprising learnings you've found from this? Like you said, it's a hairier issue than you thought originally. So I'm just wondering, like, whatever, I don't know, sound bites you can give us around like pricing models or like integrations or lack thereof, or blah blah blah. Like, what are some things that you have found like, really fun tidbits?
It's a good question. The thing that I'm in the thick of right now is implementation, and we're working with a professional services arm to do it. But it was mind blowing to me how contracts have been written. There is just the full spectrum of agreements right now. It is that's certainly number one. It's mind blowing to me the amount of time spent on vetting new providers. Trying to go through this process of discovery and demo, but the vendor pushes back because they want to do a discovery call before you even get a demo, before you can get your questions answered on whether or not they integrate, right? The B2B software sales horizontally has changed a ton, and we think that's going to come really quickly into multifamily. So like self-guided demos on demand, starting your shopping experience with social proof, and then shortlisting before you move into the buying phase. A couple of those things have been eye-opening to me. And I think the other thing that's eye-opening to me is watching horizontal trends and how multifamily still is a year, 2 years, 3 years behind them. There's so much opportunity in this industry still. And yeah, hopefully we're ahead of or skating where the puck is going in terms of cost control, corporate expense, etc.
Yeah, let me ask more specifically on a couple things. So, like, have you learned anything than you would have been privy to before at Funnel or G5, as far as like how many of the vendors are pricing themselves. And does that then lend you to, man, if I was going to market, like how come this this type of vendor doesn't charge in this type of way?
It's a good question. And I'd say our terms will allow us to aggregate and anonymize information. And I don't think I have enough critical mass yet to give you a response that's anonymized. So
okay.
There have been a couple of like, whoa moments already as we structure the data out of some of these agreements. But privacy is and confidentiality is critical to the platform as well. So yeah, we'll pass on that question.
Yeah, no problem. I was just thinking like how when I'll keep using Fiona as the example here, but when we started, there were people that were like, you should charge a startup fee, and others were like, I would never buy it if it had a startup fee. And then there were folks that were like, you should charge on unit count. And then there were other folks that were like, no, you should definitely not charge on unit. You should charge a flat fee no matter the size. And so you just hear complete ends of the spectrum in this industry. And we've also found that like the pricing model in this space is almost as important as the product, the way that you price and bill. So even with things like in other spaces, it's very common to charge like a percentage of spend or something, but charging a percentage of spend does not work in this industry, or at least it did not work for us with Fiona or what have you. So it's just a fascinating thing for me and how those models are behind the times too. I can tell you that
just about everything applies. And that was one of the hardest parts of building the software, was that we had to accommodate setup fees, one-time fees, monthly recurring, annual recurring, per unit, per location, transactional, per lease, per lead, per phone call. Everything applies. It's across the whole spectrum. And that is partly why it's so difficult to comprehend, right? Like I had a very interesting negotiation. I'll be a little bit delicate with this, but a very interesting negotiation with a product that I was selling against one of the larger PMS companies. And the way that we were approaching pricing was, tell us where we need to be and we'll make it happen. Like, we have a superior product, tell us where we need to be and we'll make it happen. They couldn't tell us where we needed to be because the contract was so complex. And this is one of the most sophisticated operators I've ever worked with. The contract was so complex, so bundled, that they couldn't come back and give us an apples to apples. So some of that might be intentional on the vendor side, but everything applies.
Yeah, I found that too. And a lot of times when the objection in this space may be like, oh, you need to price it this way or you need to do that, you're like, okay. And then they're like, well, and it's like, well, that's not really the objection. It just is like an easy button to get out. What about, this has been interesting to me, but flexibility of the agreement. So you don't have to disclose like any companies, but in this space, we've also seen in the early days, we found a lot of clients were not pushing us. They're like, yep, we'll take your one-page agreement. We wanted one page that's the common tongue. Like, we didn't want lawyer in there. And then however, in recent years, we've started to notice more and more people trying to make our one-page contract have all of these like extra red lines and whatever. And so then it made me wonder, like, man, is this prevalent across the industry that they're now asking everybody to do this? Or is this just, sort of like anecdotal evidence to us? So just wondering about, like, do you see flexibility within the agreements happening, or like where you basically have the same company, but there's, very different terms?
I didn't expect these questions. They're awesome questions. I've seen the same thing. I've seen this like maturation, I'd say, from simple agreements into far more complex agreements where IT is now taking a leading role. Things like cyber insurance are far more prevalent now than they were before, right? Like data privacy is far more prevalent now than it was before. CCPA, GDPR, like all of these things have been introduced that the PMCs need some kind of protection against. I haven't really seen them like enacted yet. We haven't really had a crazy cyber breach that, breached contracts and triggered insurance policies, but they're getting more and more complex for sure. And in terms of flexibility, I think it's a company culture thing. I think if your company culture is we need to prove ourselves every single day, you're going to do a 30-day agreement, and you're probably going to have long-standing customers. If your company policy is more, we want to lock you in for 3 years because we don't want you to leave because we've got expenses to pay, it's off on a rocky start straight away.
For us, we've noticed a couple things that are interesting. Like now that folks are getting more, I guess, deliberate with the terms in the agreement, sometimes it's more of a blanket from legal. Like they'll be like, you need on-site insurance. And it's like, well, we're not on site, so I don't know why we need that. And so we'll push back on those things, which, that kind of turnaround is really laborious, for us. And it costs us a lot in legal fees to even do this. So we've even talked about, like, we've been really flexible before, but now should we have this thing like where you need to be spending X with us before we'll do anything custom in the agreement? I mean, there are certain lines we hold that we refuse to do, but certain things where people are like, our agreements show month to month, but they're like, I want a 30-day out clause. And we'll say, like, well, our agreement says 10 days out. But if you want us to change it to 30, I guess we'll change it to 30. So then we change it to 30 because it's this blanket thing that they need to do versus like really reading our agreement. So my point with that is, like, there's on when you're working with your vendor, it costs them a lot in legal fees to go back and forth on this. And it's really also hard for them to manage. And a lot of times people are asking for things that are not, that don't really apply to that vendor anymore. And then we just find the marketer or whoever's like, just come on, it doesn't matter about like on-site insurance. We know you're not on site. Yeah. Just agree to it.
We've seen exactly the same thing, honestly. Whatever. There's a full spectrum right now, which is really interesting. I've even seen it go as far as customers who will only write contracts on their paper, like won't write a contract on the vendor's paper. So we've seen just about every gamut of that. And I do understand why it's getting more sophisticated. Like multifamily's going through a host of change right now all at once, right? Like cybersecurity was something that was not on the radar a year and a half, 2 years ago. And all of a sudden, like these intake forms from the IT teams and, CCPA, GDPR, all of these like SEC compliance changing, like all of this is evolving really quickly. And I can see risk mitigation being critical for multifamily operators right now. So I can see why it's changing. I also see the burden on the vendor side as well. That contract management is something we're looking at. Like standardized clean terms is something that we've kind of had a half eye on.
I was going to say, like, you're starting with managing vendor contracts, but in reality, if they keep asking for all this custom stuff, you're going to now need a product to help us manage our client contracts.
Imagine a world in which the operator could say, hey, we will only work with companies on these terms, and then vendors going into the agreement would know straight away, right? Like we only do 30-day outs.
Totally.
That would eliminate a lot of companies.
Well, I was curious about building out this, call it bi-directional marketplace, but between vendors and operators, where are you spending more of your time, or where do you think you need to spend more of your time building notable vendors? Because I could see you going an operator and then them saying, okay, well, who's in this market? And it's like, well, not G5, not Digible. I'm kidding. But that's just as important as then going to a vendor like Digible and saying, and us asking who's there, and you saying, well, I have these PMCs, blah, blah, blah. So I'm wondering if you're kind of trying to do that equally, or if you've already decided I'm really going to put more focus on getting those operators sold into this, and then I'll get to the vendors. I know you have to do both kind of at the same time, but I just didn't know how you think about that.
If I could turn back the clock, building a two-sided marketplace is hard, because you've got two distinct audiences, and you have to build both at the same time to bring value to both, right? Like it is not easy, especially when you're bootstrapping the business. So, I mean, you got to have marketing prowess to be able to do both successfully. The nice part about the discovery platform is that reviews and copywriting, like we were able to aggregate and populate the discovery platform from day one, which brought value to the operator side from day one. All right, there weren't a ton of reviews and there weren't a ton of enhanced profiles, but even just the categorization of the landscape was helpful from day one because it hadn't really been done before, right? So that brought value from day one to the operator side. When we introduced the community, that was very much for the operators, right? Like come and ask questions of other people using software to see if they like that software still. Come and get relevant content on structured discussion channels, right? So if you're interested in maintenance, cool, there's a maintenance channel there. And that was always kind of the focus more on the operator side. With Revyse Stack Intelligence, it's all operator, right? But our focus is equal. We've got to make sure that the Revyse Discovery Marketplace is 100% relevant, 100% up to date. But we also have to build this back-end business as well. And the cool part about the two platforms is that they're so intertwined. And what I mean by that is when we start going through agreements for an operator, if there isn't a product listing on the discovery place, it notifies us straight away. So if someone enters a vendor into the vendor intelligence platform that isn't on the discovery marketplace, we get a notification, we create a listing for them. And so now it's like this kind of virtuous life cycle whereby it's discovered for us on our behalf, and then we can go and keep the discovery platform up to date.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, have you met with any, I guess, resistance or hesitation from, I'll say, since we're a vendor, from some of the bigger vendors? Yeah. I can't imagine that some of the large PMSs, we don't have to name, or we could, are diving into this marketplace. And it does make me think a little bit about the kind of the advent or boom of digital marketing in multifamily. It was like, we don't always want to be with all the other properties and on apartments.com, we want to have more one-to-one or, establish our own brand. So I just didn't know if you've already bumped into that with some of the bigger names on the vendor side or
across the spectrum again. And I want to give a shout out to RealPage. RealPage has gone through the gamut.
I'm writing this down. Did you put this? We're getting a shout out to RealPage. I'm going to journal it.
I have an affinity there for RealPage, right? Going through the G5 acquisition. And the G5 acquisition was right as Dana was coming in as CEO. And there was this promise that Dana had kind of like an open garden mindset, right? Like historically, RealPage was the walled garden under Steve Wynn's leadership. Well, Dana has helped a little bit with the partnership ecosystem. And RealPage does care about supporting innovation. And so they're actually really behind the Revyse platform. They've actually signed up their product listings. They care about transparent reviews. You'd be mind blown how many companies have said to us, we don't want reviews. Can you please take this down? Like, we're petrified about our customers leaving reviews on a public forum. And that's exactly what we want to highlight, right? Like, we want to highlight those companies because we want to inform buying decisions. So
is it optional or is it required?
Not. We spent a ton of time with our legal team before setting up Revyse. And there is a product listing there for those companies that don't want a product listing. And anyone can go and leave a review on them, assuming that they are an authentic review, and we have a manual verification process. So it's been very interesting to watch, the cool companies and the companies that they know have a good product, good account management, really get behind it. And then the companies that are maybe earlier stage or all well established that know they've got, bugs and glitches and issues, and they're like, whoa, we don't necessarily want this.
Do you port in like Google reviews, Facebook, or anything else or is it strictly kind of native Revyse reviews that you showcase?
Native Revyse reviews, and
okay.
We had to be pretty strict in that when we set up the business, because reviews are obviously closely monitored by the FTC. And so we had to be very in line with FTC guidelines on review solicitation, displaying reviews, making sure the reviews are authentic. Mm-hmm. So everything is directly through the Revyse platform.
Well, Ben, as we wrap up here, we always like to ask for hot takes. So, obviously, if it applies to vendor ecosystem, would love, whatever you have, but, you can go outside your lane if you want.
Good question. I think this industry has been fat and happy for a little bit. I think the next 18 months especially are going to be hard on both sides of this industry, right? Like, margins are razor thin on the operator side. Capital's dried up on the vendor side. Rents are softening. Insurance is still soaring, although we may have seen a peak to the expenses. Like, this is kind of a perfect storm in this industry right now, all coming together. I'm hearing a lot coming out of NMHC that there's a lot of optimism coming out of that. I maybe have more of a pessimistic lens. But man, we feel like spending got loose. corporate policy got loose, renewals got loose. Like the industry didn't need to be incredibly disciplined over the last decade. I'm very interested to see what the next couple of years bring on both the vendor side and the operator side. And we're just convinced that, expense control, cost cutting is going to be core to both sides of that equation over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I like the idea of saving, like money, like the cost cutting. But well, maybe I should ask: do you guys have a way to help someone utilize more of what they already are buying? It's almost like the reverse.
Good question. So because every product is categorized, what we're able to do when we upload all the agreements is surface any duplicate spend. So if you have multiple products in the same category, that's the system would automatically show overlap and show you opportunity for tech stack consolidation there as well. So that's another area that I don't know if that answers your question directly, but that's another area in which we're helping surface that consolidation opportunity as well.
Yeah, I could also see something to the effect of, like, you mentioned like review solicitation. So it'd be like, hey, this, I'm not asking for this now, but it could be like, did you know that your package also includes like review solicitation? You are not using that yet, like missed opportunity here. Then you're helping leverage and get more out of what you're paying for. It's like us, like we pay for Microsoft Office, but we use Zoom. It's like that would be an overlap, but that would also be like missed opportunity of like the rest of Office we don't touch.
Intake, when we build out intake and procurement, that's high on our radar. So when someone says, hey, we're shopping for reputation management software, the very first question would be, do you know that you already have reputation management in place? Right. So we certainly want to help with sprawl. But I also think, and I think what you're angling at is there's opportunity for product updates to be fed through the Revyse platform in the back end as well. So when someone looks at a company in Revyse Vendor Intelligence, there could be a little icon that says, hey, they've just released a brand new product. So I think there's ample opportunities once we have critical mass on both sides. There's lots that we can do with the data. There's lots that we can do with communication between the two sides as well.
I've got another hot take. Well, my hot take that I'm thinking I can toss to you. But you mentioned you didn't use the word SDR earlier as far as the buying process. But man, I have a thing against SDRs. So for those that aren't aware, it's basically what Ben was talking about earlier, where it's like, David wants to buy something. Please show me a demo. And then they schedule like a 15 or 30-minute call with me. And they're like, hey, I want to make sure you, David, are actually a buyer before I put you in touch with one of my very important sales reps. So I'm just going to ask you the same questions you already filled out in the form and make sure you weren't lying to me before I give you the sales rep calendar. And I'm like, I'm already feeling my emotions inside of me of how ticked off I get when I get an SDR. I will put it in my
on the aura.
Yeah, my aura ring shows major stress right now. I will put in the contact form, do not connect me to an SDR or I am not buying from you. I am like flat out, I refuse. And if you can't read my contact form first, you've lost me as a customer. I'm not even going to go through the process. I don't care who you are. So anyways, that's my hot take on SDRs. I'm wondering, a lot of this surfaced out of the way that people you believe are changing the way they buy software in multifamily. So what would be your advice to vendors out there? What's the right way for us to go about, hawking our wares?
This has changed a ton, right? And I share your disdain for outreach. I know Bobby does too. So we have a few things that we're watching really closely in horizontal software again, right? In fact, Google just introduced rules around, if 3 out of 1,000 emails are marked as spam, then you get blocked from bulk outreach, which we think is dreamy. And we're hoping that although there's workarounds, we're hoping that helps suppress some of this outreach. But this is not an industry to do cold outreach in, right? Like this is such an insular industry. Everyone knows everyone. Someone's going to find you. Founder brands, which you guys do incredibly well. Marketing-led thought leadership, which you guys do incredibly well. Review and discovery platforms, right? There hasn't been one in our industry before. There is now. And people are using that to start their buying journey. I think trade shows are incredibly valuable for the in-person component. I think expo halls need to be blown up. There's not enough showcasing of innovation. people who can afford it have a 10 by 10 in the back of the hall, and that's just not working for new vendor discovery. But I think there's a couple of new ways that business is being done right now. So discovery platforms, founder brands, community, being able to be active with community is another one as well. And marketing-led thought leadership.
I love your. I'm going to make you do one more hot take here. When you say blow up vendor halls, obviously that's where like NAA and Optech or whatever are making all their money. So how would you recommend they allow it to be blown up, but still,
I haven't had a ton of energy to put towards their business model. We've been busy. I don't know the answer, but I know that. From everything that we're hearing, we're talking with a lot of vendors. It's very expensive. The ROI is decreasing. Some are probably better than others in terms of target audience. But man, in an expo hall, even if you've got great visibility, maybe 2% of the total audience there is in market shopping for what you sell, right? So you're hoping for brand recall when they are actually in market. And unless you've got dang good search, dang good content, that's very difficult to achieve. An example of a company that I think has done it incredibly well is Funnel. They picked a core color. They went flag on the message with centralization. I think they did a very good job of thought leadership, marketing driven, inbound model. And I think that's the model to follow.
Small correction there, Ben. They stole a core color. They didn't pick a cool core.
It was a bad copy.
Yeah.
Of a copy.
That's right. A bad copy of a copy. Tyler, I hope you're listening.
Yeah. Well, one last idea there. When I think of the vendor halls, it seems like a relatively simple model, and all the vendors pay it to show up at the conferences. But man, what I've really loved those networking or speed dating things. So I could also see something though that is more based on performance. Like, would Digible be willing to pay a matchmaking fee if whoever, Dennis at AIM, was like, hey, Digible, who's your ideal customer? And then every customer coming in is like, I'm looking for this thing. Because when we talk to why did you attend the NAA? The marketer will be like, oh, I want to see what's new out there. I'm looking for this kind of solution. So it'd be super cool to be match made and be like, oh, Michelle Smith's looking for this. You should meet so-and-so. Would I pay a finder's fee or a matchmaking fee or a percentage of revenue? It's based on success versus just the
I like
impression.
That. I will tell you, a conference that we went to this year, it was the first time we went, was Blueprint. And they handled the networking component of the event incredibly well. The app that they use was matchmaking people like, hey, I'm interested in this. Operators would do the same thing. And they would do exactly that, David. They'd matchmake. Hey, this person's interested. Are you interested? Yes. And that facilitated, I think, a lot more conversation than a 10 by 10 at the back of the hall.
Yeah. And then imagine all the money Funnel would save if they didn't have to do the big booth. And they would then be willing to spend that on whatever, the matchmaking or whatever, right? It allows them to service the customer better. So there's the cost of building a Funnel booth is egregious in my mind. And the conference operator is not capturing that. They're capturing the sponsorship space, but not the cost to build the booth and store it and all that stuff.
And that is that brand recall, right? If you go big, you make a splash. That is what people leave remembering. But I wholeheartedly agree. I think an underdone component of the conferences today is just a simple meeting space, right? It's so noisy everywhere. To have a simple meeting space where you can sit down with someone and have a good business conversation, because the real estate is so expensive, you can't make it up with just a cubicle, right? So I don't know. I think there's a lot of opportunity for innovation there. I think digital conferences are going to get a little bit more traction, people just wanting to do it on their own time, on demand. As something, again, we're looking at.
Well, Ben, thanks for coming on and sharing with us. What if people want to learn more, where do you want to point them?
Good question. Very active on LinkedIn. Revyse.com is live, and it's an awesome platform today for use. Revyse community is going to be unlocked really quickly. And again, that's a great place for collaboration, communication, and even direct messaging as well.
Ben, you missed a chance. This could have been your title music moment. You could have said, you won't find me on LinkedIn. You'll only find me on Revyse community.
Private.
Yeah. 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 All right. Well, thanks, Ben.
Thanks
we appreciate
so much,
it.
you guys. What a great conversation.
Yeah.